Welcome to Scotland is Now Race to Zero, a two-day conference brought to you by Team Scotland, a partnership approach led by Scottish Development International and Scottish Government in collaboration with city regions and key stakeholders. We hope that you have been able to join several of our sessions yesterday and earlier today and look forward to the sessions this afternoon. Full details of the programme and our fantastic speakers can be found on the conference website, www.scotlandracetozero.co.uk. I am Mary Henderson from Scottish Development International, and I'm here to introduce our next session, which is Edinburgh's Climate Resilient Regeneration. And I'd now like to hand over to Graham Hill from Arcadis, who will be chairing the discussion. Graham.
Good morning, everyone. Launching a new city plan, Edinburgh is continuing its significant regeneration and has entered 2021 with cross-party ambitions, focused on becoming net carbon zero by 2030 and reducing poverty. The new Byquarter is set to put the city on the international stage for life sciences, and plans for the 1.3 billion regeneration of Granton waterfront will deliver between 3,000 and 4,000 homes, an ambitious new city park, new commercial and retail space, and new community infrastructure centred on climate resilience. I'm a City Executive for Scotland with Arcadis, and I'm delighted to chair the session for you today. I have an hour to ask our panellists questions. We'd like to invite you to use the Q&A for any questions you might like me to ask. And if time does not permit, to get to all the questions, then we'll be following up with answers. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel of speakers. First, Councillor Adam McVey, leader of the City of Edinburgh. John Batten, Global Cities Director with Arcadis. Richard Thompson, Architectural Director with Parabola. Jude Barber, Director and Architect with Collective Architecture. Patel, Programme Director with Edinburgh Council. And Nick Penny, Head of Scotland with Savills. We don't have a lot of time, so let's get straight to the questions. And let me start with you, if I may, Adam. Adam, what are the main ambitions for Edinburgh's new city plan? And what projects are the council investing in to help achieve these ambitions?
We have three main aims as a city that we approved in our business plan just a couple of weeks ago to reduce, as you said, reduce poverty, reduce carbon in our city and improve well-being for our residents, both those that are in the city now and those that will be in the city in the future. All our strategies very much speak to those aims and objectives. So the brownfield-led approach in the city plan is aiming to build on those sustainability credentials, trying to get the absolute maximum level of sustainability in that, and also connecting in to build that inclusive urban regeneration in some instances, when you look at Byquarter and its relationship to Craigmillar and other areas, and also in their own right, things like Granton that are of enormous scale, and one trying to speak to the city more widely in terms of a waterfront that we can be proud of, that creates amenity space for people, that puts a new urban park right at the water's edge so that everyone in Edinburgh can enjoy it, but also builds that community in its own right, with its own culture, with its own amenities and facilities within it. I should say all our plans, including our city plan, are aligned to that 2030 target, that 2030 target of reducing poverty, 2030 target of getting to a net zero position. So everything speaks to that. So a huge amount of direct investment being taken forward by the council. Powder Hall, Meadowbank, Fountain Bridge are all about 1,000 new homes, 350 of them affordable within those kind of council-led developments. A huge amount of development going on in Byquarter, as you said, a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of economic opportunity for the city widely and also the communities that are closest to it, and also for Edinburgh's reputation as a real world leader in a frontier technology in building a real industry, which is a new and exciting one. I should say as well, these plans, while they stand on their own 2 feet, they do speak to the other plans and strategies in the council. So the mobility plan, the city mobility plan, again, which is aligned to 2030, is very interconnected with the city plan in building that sustainable future. So if you look at the two major developments that the city is, well, two of the major developments that are being progressed in the city, Byquarter and Granton, the mobility strategy proposes tram extensions to both of those, linked in with the existing network, which is in itself being extended to Leith and Newhaven right now, literally as we speak, tracks are being laid. So everything comes together to build that sustainable, inclusive, connected city, really in the modern approach, not looking at the old-fashioned way of how we do this, but how we build a 20-minute city where people, regardless of where they live, have access to those opportunities, the economic success that Edinburgh was and will be in future, and also some of those issues which we've grappled with as a city, which is housing, and making sure our residents right now have the housing that they need at the standard and quality they need. Last comment from me is the council homes or affordable homes that are being built right now in the city are some of the best being built anywhere, and we're enormously proud of that fact. We're trying to build a city that works for everyone, all our citizens together.
Thank you very much, Adam. So turning now to John Batten. John, from your perspective of international cities, what do you see as Edinburgh's strengths as a city, and what are its key challenges, and how does it overcome them?
Thank you, Graham. I have a great reference point. In 2018, Arcadis published the Sustainable Cities Index. This is an index that we publish every couple of years. Our next index will be in late 2021. We look at three pillars: the social dimension, the planetary environmental dimension, and the economic vitality of a city. We ranked 100 cities, and Edinburgh placed third in the 100 ranking. That's pretty formidable. And it was sandwiched between Stockholm and Singapore, which is pretty auspicious company when you look at city attraction factors. Now, what made Edinburgh such an attractive city is its livability. Adam just described, a sustainable, inclusive, connected city. I think the index identified those traits in Edinburgh. So it ranks up there in top tier cities from the context of livability. We describe the city in our report as a balanced, innovative city. And that is, it balances a lot of different things to contribute to its livability and its attraction. Two of the key points were accessibility, how the city is inviting, how the city does want to be connective and inclusive. And the other one is this concept that we just spoke of now, is sort of, it's a frontier city. It's a city that wants to be entrepreneurial, wants to invest in enterprise types of projects, clusters and these kinds of things. So it also really is built around the citizen experience. And it was described having similar attributes as Wellington in New Zealand, San Francisco in the Bay Area of the US, Boston, and Lisbon. So those, again, good cities to be associated with. So when you move from its strengths, livability, this attraction factor for people and investment, this balanced innovator description, and you look at some of the key challenges in the future, clearly, I think in light of Brexit, in light of COVID, these are sort of, disruptive kind of events, but they also create opportunities, I think, for Edinburgh. So I think most cities will go through some form of COVID reset, right? And I think if I were advising Edinburgh, I'd say stay the course. You were already on the right course pre-COVID, pre-Brexit. Stay that course and move forward, because you are a world-class city. So that's my answer to your question, Graham.
John, excellent. Thank you for that from that perspective given to us at a very early hour in New York. Thank you. So Richard, turning to you, in terms of the plans for Edinburgh Park, and how can the mixed-use development reduce its carbon emission output across both homes and offices?
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know Edinburgh Park, it's a 1990s business park built on the fringe of Edinburgh, 6 miles from the city centre, but close to the airport. It's a very high quality environment and home to many companies and a big employment centre, but it's of a particular era. It's low density, has high car dependency, and is a commercial monoculture. Weekends, evenings, there's not much going on. So 7 years ago, Parabola bought 42 acres of land at the southern extent of Edinburgh Park, the undeveloped extent of Edinburgh Park, which was earmarked for 1 million square feet of offices. And we've not rushed into a master plan for this area. We've looked very, very closely at it over many years and have worked closely with the council in developing detailed plans now, and now have detailed planning approval for 1,800 homes, 1 million square feet of offices, a hotel, leisure facilities and small scale retail. So a sort of genuine mixed use quarter. We're now constructing the first phase of that master plan and have, which will be our first commercial building, which will be an all electric building. And alongside that, a significant amount of public realm. So I think this sort of investment in Edinburgh Park and this sort of vision for Edinburgh Park has been clearly communicated to all. And actually it's something that's being received and understood very well in the investment community. Why Edinburgh Park? Unusual for business parks, but Edinburgh Park is a brilliant location in terms of communication. It's bookended by 2 heavy rail stations. It has 3 tram stops going through from one end to the other and one right in the middle. It's 10 minutes from the airport. It's close to the M8 and the bypass and has excellent cycle connectivity. So when we bought the site, those were all the triggers. Those are all the things we were looking for in terms of connectivity and, you know, where do you build a genuine mixed use quarter? And it sort of ticked all the boxes in that sense, even though that's not the image it had to date. I think the real game changer also for Edinburgh Park was the introduction of the tram in, I think, 2014, around then. And that really changed the nature of the park, both in terms of connectivity, so which is clearly, you know, just made it more accessible, but also I think it changed perceptions of the park. So people were going through the park who may never have visited it, and it suddenly changed people's attitude to what the park could be. And it gave us confidence that we could change the nature of the park and generate a genuine mixed use quarter. The first challenge our sort of master plan team were given was create a community, which seems like a sort of fairly nebulous concept. But what we knew was that we had to create somewhere where people would want to live, would want to work, would want to play, would want to visit, even if they didn't live anywhere near Edinburgh Park. So we had to introduce culture, we had to introduce high quality landscape, we had to really focus on placemaking. So that was it was a big vision statement, but something that's underpinned the whole master plan. We also needed to sort of generate a genuine mixed use character where people could live and work in close proximity. And I think this goes back to Councillor McVey's point about the 20-minute city. I think there's an opportunity at Edinburgh Park to genuinely create that environment. And finally, sort of the biggest issue for us, I think, was the opportunity to work at scale. And I think it's a real privilege to have a site of that scale with such good transport links and with the opportunity to generate this kind of mixed use community. And one of the aspects of this is that we've been able to look at the opportunities for using on-site renewables, for using district heating. And in the early stages of our scheme, we focused heavily on operational carbon and looked at opportunities to generate a low carbon district, a low carbon quarter, and developed a gas CHP district heating system right at the start of our journey, and quickly realized that fossil fuels were not the future, and we had to back away from that. So we took the decision sort of 4 or 5 years ago to go all electric, and we're now working up plans for an all electric district heating system on the park, which I think will bring, you know, sort of genuine zero carbon operation for the park and will be a game changer for Edinburgh Park itself. And we hope for the future of Edinburgh Park as a mixed use quarter.
Thank you very much, Richard. We'll be coming back to you later. Turning to the north of the city then, Jude, if I may ask you, on Granton and the ambitions for Granton waterfront, how can it improve biodiversity in the area and also create zero carbon buildings?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Granton waterfront, it really is a once in a lifetime opportunity really for the area and for the city itself, to not only address the acute housing and affordability needs, but also to address the climate resilience, biodiversity and livability. So we saw this very much as the evolution of the city, from the old town to the new town to then the coastal town. So that's really about providing a shift in perception around the north of the city and positioning not at the fringes, at the edges, but really at the heart of a region, at the heart of a constellation of coastal towns on a dynamic, activated bay, which it is. It's fantastic. So it's also about doing things differently, not just a master plan, not just a strategy, but a really robust and flexible framework with some very clear principles to ensure that that can actually be delivered, that ambition can actually be delivered. And that was importantly developed, that vision was developed through an intensive year-long engagement process with local people, organisations, groups, educational, cultural establishments, to develop a sort of shared vision for the area that was rooted in its place and its history and its people, but also one that was open and flexible, that could adapt to the change and what's coming. And this overarching vision is linked to a robust design framework, and it's really key there that that's integrated with strategies, very particular strategies that look to harness the biodiversity, the landscape, and low carbon development opportunities. So we designed a number of connections and multiple benefits in our minds, so as a multidisciplinary team. And that meant balancing density, public space, active travel and blue-green networks, and bringing those all together into a consistent whole. And really at the heart of that, Councillor McVey touched on that, is this, the heart of that is the coastal park, which is for visitors and residents alike. So instead of building right up to the water for the few, it was really about opening up that space and providing a generous, open, climate resilient landscape for everyone, for people and habitats alike. So importantly at Granton, it's about taking a low carbon approach in every aspect of development, from the design of homes to the public streets and spaces, to infrastructure, modern methods of construction and beyond, into how the community actually works and lives and breathes together. So that's about working with existing site constraints and infrastructure and ensuring that we're creating dense human scale development. That's really key, with very clear defined character areas that respond to the topography. And aligning that, importantly, to some very key design principles and guidelines. And considering how the natural environment and the spaces actually work together, and that they're all entirely connected. And importantly, building on what's already there, some of the existing buildings and assets that are already there. This is obviously critical to a zero carbon approach, and retrofitting and repurposing that going forward. So really, in terms of ambition, I think Granton really is a step change for the city. It's about ensuring that we can all live differently, that we can all live better, and be open and flexible, coastal and healthy, and resilient and inclusive, because ultimately what we're really trying to do is create a place that stands the test of time.
Jude, it's fantastic. It's so exciting. So in terms of the economic aspect, turn to you, Sat, what will the regeneration Granton waterfront support in terms of economic growth in the region?
Thanks, Graham. In terms of Granton waterfront, I think Jude's given a really good explanation of the development framework and the ambition that we're trying to achieve. Ultimately, Granton waterfront is rooted in sustainability, placemaking and social inclusion. So really that is the offshoot of economic regeneration for the area and for the region. It's a 10 to 15 year construction programme, so of course we'll create jobs in construction. We project about 10,000 direct construction jobs and 6,000 indirect construction jobs through the supply chain. But I think more importantly, the ambition that we've got for Granton means that we're creating jobs in emerging sectors. So the investment in net zero carbon that we seek to achieve, including the district heat network and net zero carbon technologies in the fabric of building, mean that we're really creating jobs and supporting jobs in the region for that emerging green sector. Equally, we have a real ambition to deliver modern methods of construction. So again, trying to support that emerging sector. And we have some, real life examples of that happening within Granton. So we have earmarked a site for housing next year, which will go on site next year. And that's a demonstrator project. That's a pilot between ourselves, the Scottish Government, and Offsite Solutions Limited, amongst other partners. So that's a real life project where we're seeking to deliver net zero carbon homes through modern methods of construction. Similarly, we've also earmarked a site within Granton for one of our partners, that is Edinburgh College. So they're looking to deliver a £70 million asset, which is a construction centre of excellence. And that's really a student facility for the future, to basically train students and people in modern methods of construction. So again, I think we're supporting the region by providing that space for that to happen. Whilst we're looking at construction jobs, we also, within the commercial and cultural space that we've got, we also seek to create ongoing jobs for the locality and of course for the region as well. So really there's a push there to support jobs really in the emerging kind of startup industry. So again, a real life example of that, Granton Station building, which is our a B-listed derelict building within Granton, that goes on site in May to be refurbished and upgraded to become a creative industries kind of space for incubation space. So again, supporting jobs within that sector. In terms of the homes themselves, we're delivering 3,500 net zero carbon homes. So there's a real push there to support fuel poverty reduction. We've projected that over the 40-year life of homes, we would save residents about £15 million in energy by providing energy efficient buildings. So again, that's money going back into the economy and supporting the region. We also plan to invest in green corridors and active travel. So we have ambitions to invest in transport hubs in Granton, cycleways that will connect into the city. So again, all of that is to improve connectivity for Granton and the wider region in the bid to make it more accessible, to create mobility and really to create employment opportunities for the region. And then finally, we're investing a great deal of money, as Jude and Councillor McVey said, in green space, including the coastal park. So we invest money for up to improvements in about 200 hectares of green space, including that coastal park as well. So again, we've projected that that should deliver about £26 million worth of annual positive outcomes in health and wellbeing for the economy. And we're projecting that we'll attract about 700,000 visitors to the area, which again, we're projecting will deliver about £25 million worth of visitor spend on an annual basis. So that's all money going back into the region and supporting economic growth. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sad. So talking of money, I'll come to you, Nick, at Savills. What are the major strengths in Edinburgh's investment profile, and how can the city best capitalise on these strengths to attract investment over the coming 1 to 5 years?
Thanks, Graham. A big question. I think John touched upon some of the higher level macro points that attract or make Edinburgh very attractive for a place to live and work and invest in and be and travel to and visit. From a property perspective, I think we go back to the property fundamentals. We are attractive as a city to a broad range of investors, and that range of investors has become even wider over the last few years. And there's significant activity from overseas capital and investment into the city and indeed Scotland. To put that in the context of the last 15 years or so, pre-global financial crisis, overseas investment into the real estate sector was less than 20% on average. And over the last 5 years, that average has grown to more than 50%. And if you take the Edinburgh office sector last year, it was over 90% came from overseas investors. And there's a number of reasons for that. The world is a smaller place, as we all know, and many of these investors are now comparing Edinburgh with Hong Kong and Seoul and Paris and New York and global cities. We have a relatively stable political environment compared to some of the other jurisdictions. We've got a very well-established and stable legal system. We've got full repairing and insuring leases that we don't see in other parts of the world that pass a lot of the obligations onto tenants. We still have relatively long leases that tenants are committing to. And all those things considered and taken into consideration, we have relatively attractive pricing. So real estate in the context of its position now in a global position is very, very attractive. And I think going forward, we've heard a lot about the new opportunities in BioQuarter, which I'm sure we'll talk about again, and Granton and other new developments that Edinburgh is proud to support and to have to offer to the world, are really important. And a lot of these are places that are meaningful, not just single-use places, but they attract people to live and work and play. But we also need to be mindful of the 85% of stock that will still be standing post 2050. That so embodied carbon and operational carbon in the existing stock of real estate. And these opportunities going forward, I think where they are aligned with ESG objectives, particularly around about net zero and social impact, will provide very attractive to investors. So I guess how we can capitalise on these things, three things, I think. One, the real estate fundamentals will always be key, and that's been significant in attracting overseas capital and will continue to be important. I think facilitation and continued support of change, such as positive repurposing of real estate, as well as the new developments to create these meaningful places, particularly where they help progress the wider ESG objectives. And then finally, I think Sat might have touched upon it, that we embrace and understand the importance of technology and innovation as a driver in attracting investment, not just in real estate.
Thanks very much. So thank you for your opening remarks, panelists. And just looking at the questions, and before I go to the questions that come in, just transport's been mentioned in a number of the answers. And Adam, you mentioned a city mobility plan and its close alignment with the city plan. I guess it'd be very important in terms of these new regeneration projects. What do you feel is the role that transport infrastructure in Edinburgh has in driving towards its regeneration plans?
I think there's a huge role, especially, we're not just grappling with the issue of development and growth as a city, which is certain pretty much. Our population has grown at a very fast rate in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the forecasts are that is going to continue. We're also trying to get that modal shift to try and meet our environmental aims. So unless we decarbonise transport and unless we decarbonise heat in the city, we are not going to hit our net zero target by 2030. So we have to cater for more people wanting to live in the city and get them around sustainably, quickly, effectively and efficiently. And we also have to build a model that works for everyone who's here right now, because it isn't going to be sustainable for everyone to drive a car. And, I have some sympathy with people that say, but we'll just convert into EV charging points. Realistically, the city's grid will not sustain that if there's no element of behaviour change. And also the city's space won't sustain it. Everyone will just be sitting with a bit less pollution, but still stuck in the same traffic that they are right now. So we need a sustainable future to unlock that development, make it easier, make it connected. And that's why there's two strands to this, really. One is building the infrastructure that means people can be comfortable in their own locality, comfortable walking around, shopping in their own area. Two, where they're confident enough to go by bike, where appropriate within those journeys within the city. And three, for those longer journeys where we realise that not everyone who works in the BioQuarter, to use that as a great example, will live a stone's throw away or a 10, 20-minute bike ride away, we need to make sure that mass transit is one of the things within it. We have a fantastic bus service in the city, which is almost universal coverage right across our capital city. But the investment in tram will add that rapid deployment point, and it will mean that Leith is much better connected with BioQuarter when both extensions are complete than it is right now, or that it's capable of almost imagining right now. So it's those elements of making sure the transport system works well, that people have genuine alternatives, and also that active travel infrastructure, which is so crucial, not just to how the city gets around, but to those livability factors that were being talked about earlier. Edinburgh scores high because people like living in Edinburgh, and people like living in Edinburgh because they can walk about their own area. The car, albeit it's something people hold very close to their heart and defend the right of their cars almost to the extent of they would defend the rights of their family members sometimes. Actually, for people's happiness, health and well-being, it's not the best thing to be stuck in a traffic jam. Walking around is far better for us. And when we live that, we recognise that.
Excellent, thank you. Richard, is that something you want to comment on as well? Because obviously it's important for out at the Gyle.
Absolutely, I think it's crucial. There's a lot of work the council are doing on cycle networks around the Gyle, connecting to Wester Hales and up to the north. And I think, and we're a small part of that, but anything that Edinburgh Park can do to kind of link in, I mean, green corridors, cycle routes, we're looking at those opportunities and the council have been very receptive to sort of making those connections and extending those links and routes through. We've got a big piece of work on mobility management and integration of travel, micro-mobility, how all these systems work together, how ticketing works. There's a huge piece of work. We're sort of looking at it as a private company, but it dovetails with a lot of the things that Councillor McVey has just said.
Yeah, and similarly, Jude sat the transport planning and transport infrastructure, huge part of the Granton success.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, we worked very closely as a team to look at the design of the streets and the infrastructure for Granton, anticipating hopefully that the tram would be coming there because we were discussing that in advance. So it was really trying to future-proof it for, different modes of transport coming to the area to allow it to be as accessible and walkable as possible. So we're really trying to think of it not just how it operates on a local level from day to day, but also how the area can be accessed from a city-wide perspective as well. So working closely with Sustrans and the team at the city to look at how we could actually do that in an integrated way.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, Arcadis has been working closely with the council on the business case for Granton. So Sat, in terms of the benefits, you've outlined some of them earlier. Obviously, there are huge benefits to the city and to Scotland in developing the Granton waterfront. But right now, what support is needed to help drive that development?
Thanks, Graham. I think the kind of main challenges I think we're ultimately facing are around viability, ultimately financial viability. So a lot of support in terms of how we deliver Granton is around that. We will need government support, I think, to some level, particularly around ambition around net zero carbon. Some of the key challenges for net zero carbon are around financial viability. I think as it stands right now, as we look to the future, I think district heat network, both from a financial viability, but even from a regulatory kind of viewpoint, is challenging. Some of the main challenges around a major development like Granton are around how you make a district heating network and net zero carbon viable from day one. So we are looking at retrofitting, and certainly there's a big potential for that because the council has a number of assets in the locality already. So that makes that job slightly easier. But I think added to that is really the end user view of net zero carbon homes. I don't think as we look now today, delivering net zero carbon homes doesn't deliver additional value, I think, to a developer in terms of delivering homes. It doesn't add any extra value as it stands right now. So it's really an additional cost, which makes that unviable. So again, we need some support from government around that. And then I think ultimately it's looking at a development partner and investors who are willing to support and are aligned to the kind of social and environmental objectives that we're trying to achieve in Granton. An investor, I think, who's aligned to getting returns over a longer time frame, potentially lower returns, and I think ultimately an investor who's willing, and a development partner or development partners who are willing to take some of the risk as well. I think if all of the risk sits with the council, we will struggle deliver Granton, I think. So that ultimately is where some of the support is required.
Yeah, thank you, Sat. Looking at the questions that were coming in, quite a number now. There's a lot of questions from Malcolm McQueen. Thank you, Malcolm, for being busy on the keyboard. And if I could summarise them, please, because of the number of questions that come from others. Malcolm's very interested in the green aspects of the city plans and what plans we have in terms of community woodland, looking for a percentage of tree cover increases. He's asking about growing spaces, garden, community growing projects, green corridors generally. So would someone like to respond to that in terms of plans for our regeneration of the city?
I can certainly answer that, Graham, from a Granton perspective.
Awesome.
I, of course, talked about the kind of 200 hectares of green space that we're seeking to invest in. So, that spans from the kind of coastal area to the north of Granton, but then as far west as Lauriston Farm, Lauriston Castle, into the west of that. So really it's a fairly big area. And we've just run a scope of works, which we've just got the output of, which really give us some ideas around how that space would work, what we would invest in. And, some of the answers are around that. It's community growing. And we're currently working with a provider at the moment to discuss the potential for that over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. In terms of tree growth, I think we're limited, sadly, in Granton by the Civil Aviation Authority and what they allow us to do. There's a bit of that they're not keen on more trees coming to the area on the basis that it creates wildlife, etc. That has an impact on planes landing and taking off, of course. So I think we're slightly limited by that. But what the scope has kind of set out is what a short, medium and long-term plan would be for that open space around generating uses that would really bring visitors to the area, and not just creating green space for the sake of creating green space, but really creating spaces that people can use, enjoy, live, work, play. It's really about what Jude and Councillor McVey were talking about around 20-minute neighbourhoods, having amenities on your doorstep, but at the same time, attracting visitors from wider areas and the region as well. And the ability to do that is really about having good open space that provides uses for people ultimately.
Excellent. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Graham, I think on a small scale, we'll have a community garden and a community orchard as part of the Edinburgh Park. There's a significant, each of the quadrants of the master plan has a large public green space. And one of those areas in particular is focused on a community orchard and productive gardening. We also have introduced productive gardening onto the rooftops of our BTR units, and that's been something that's been embraced by a number of the BTR operators who are starting to see that, particularly across North America, but it seems to be a trend that's coming to the UK as well.
And John, in New York, we saw the huge benefits to the city of the Million Tree Project. Anything you'd like to add from an international perspective on the benefits of green infrastructure in cities?
Well, I think it's very evident in the panel that you are really thoughtful around balancing. I remember Edinburgh is a balanced, innovating city. You're balancing place with space. And I've heard this in Sat's comments and Nick's, Richard and Jude's comments, that you appreciate the value of creating inclusive, affordable housing and the attributes of the built environment of Granton, for example. But you also are very sensitive to the coastal connection and the park amenities and the other spatial amenities that you're considering. So I'm hearing a really interesting and I think a very attractive approach that, we're building a major development, and frankly, you're really blessed to have a Granton that you can develop and reconnect, reimagine, redevelop an area that connects your community to the coast. And I love the coastal park. I think every city globally is trying to recreate or reimagine their experience with their waterfronts. Most cities are built around waterfronts because they were built as trading hubs, right? And I think you see that in Glasgow with Clyde, you see that with Singapore in Marina Bay, and you see it in New York City and Lower Manhattan, where I live. So I'm very uplifted by the discussion here that you folks are doing it very thoughtfully and balancing space with place.
Thank you very much. Turning to the questions again, John Gunn, thank you for your question. Challenging but very exciting outcomes aligned with the city's 3 strategic priorities. So a question for you, I think, Nick, in terms of the private sector. What do we need to do differently when engaging with the private sector, construction supply chains, etc., to ensure buy-in to these outcomes from the outset?
Good question. I think the private sector have clearly got a huge part to play in this, but it's a public-private sector collaboration going forward as we come out of the issues created by COVID, and look to address some of the wider ESG challenges, particularly around about social impact and net zero, obviously. It was interesting just to go back a wee bit in terms of what Sat was saying about the value side of things. Most of the private sector investors now do have parts of their investment committee papers that have changed over the last 3 to 6 to 9 months, which now include ESG credentials in terms of decision making. That is a massive change for the private sector, and I think we can't underestimate how quickly the importance of the ESG credentials, both net zero and the social impact, have come to form part of decision making, and therefore I think on the value side of it, it's understanding the value of strong social impact, of net zero, of efficiency of buildings going forward, and actually that will make a difference in terms of value. And I think we're starting to see that in terms of the private sector. So listen, private sector, as I say, going back to answering the question, private sector have got a massive part to play in this, but it can't just be carried on the shoulders of the private sector. If we are looking at a lower return environment that we're in just now, investors, I think, still will be driven by returns principally, but the decision making and the decision making will be driven more and more by the broader ESG and sustainability credentials of opportunities than just the financial returns going forward. But the financial returns will be important, and that's where the public-private sector collaboration becomes even more important.
Thank you, Nick. Adam, a question for you from Judith Patten. How does all you're speaking about tie in with the aims and objectives of the Edinburgh Climate Commission?
I think very well. I think the 2030 city plan is going to complement and enhance a lot of what we're trying to do with the Climate Commission. It's worth saying the Climate Commission recommendations, the interim recommendations, were adopted by the council. The work continues. I sit on that as vice chair, so we're very much linked into what's going on. I should say our sustainability plan as well, that kind of roadmap to 2030 is going to be published next month. And again, you'll see an enormous amount of synergy between mobility strategy, mobility plan, the city plan. It'll be published later in the year. You'll see all these documents working together in simpatico because they have to, if we're to meet those aims and objectives. As I said kind of previously, the 2 things that we need to get right if we're to get to that 2030 net zero target are a significant decarbonisation of the transport system and a significant decarbonisation of our heat network. The roadmap of how that is captured within the city plan in terms of heat, I think it's going to be well rehearsed. I think it's going to lift a lot of what the mobility plan has in terms of going forward. I actually looked in response to the previous question. Biodiversity is a running theme through all the specific spatial plans that are in the city plan from the choices document, and we'll come back later this year, and also in the broader sense of how we develop major developments in major areas. So all these things are very much going to be working together. And the thing I would highlight is, we had a Climate Commission just before, because we set them both up around the same time. We had a Poverty Commission, which recommended a whole series of actions just at the end of last year. Those have been adopted by the council. We're now working through how we respond to that proactively. But the synergy between the actions we need to take as a city to reduce poverty and reduce carbon absolutely work together. Transport is an economic equalities issue, and so is heat, and so is everything else that we need to tackle if we're to get both right. So these strategies work very, very well together. The Climate Commission is very much part of that mix in terms of bringing challenge when they need to, and also bringing hopefully some expertise and support for some of the major, quite ambitious strategies that we have in Edinburgh.
Thank you, Adam. And actually, there's a related question on the question of net zero carbon in our cities, and just recognising the reality that we are living in a historic city, and a lot of the carbon challenge, I think as Nick had mentioned, comes from the existing housing stock and actually working in effectively a World Heritage area. So what are the specific challenges that faces, and how do we plan to overcome those?
Well, there will be challenges in how we design our streets as a starting point, but if you look at what we're planning to do on George Street, for example, I think you can see a very bold, ambitious future vision of what that street can be, and crucially deliverable. It can be delivered in a relatively short period of time. I think in the next 5 years, we're aiming to complete that project. So you start there. In terms of the buildings, there will be trade-offs that we'll have to discuss. So it's not appropriate, for example, to use external wall insulation on historic buildings that have been there for hundreds of years and are part of the absolute fabric of what makes Edinburgh brilliant and the World Heritage site right in our city centre. But there are trade-offs that we need to talk about within that, and we need to work through them. That is not to say that these things will be thrown out of the window in terms of our city's heritage. They absolutely won't be. But there are solutions we can drive forward in terms of energy efficiency that are going to have to be developed. And I'll give an example, which is maybe not the one that you're thinking of when you're asking the question, but there's a Grade A listed building in my ward. It was Grade A listed because of its brutalist 1960s architecture, so not quite the Newtown aesthetic grandeur that we have on George Street. But we did manage to build a district heating system in that. We did manage to build a proper district heating system which created a great deal of efficiency, a great deal of reduction in bills for the people who are there as well. And these things are possible. So we need to, I think, a little bit of outside the box thinking, a little bit of learning from other places that have done this very well. No one has the landscape that Edinburgh has, and that's because we are the most beautiful city in the world. We will always be cognizant of that and always take that as really one of our key starting points of how we develop solutions to these things, but the solutions are out.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just a question in terms of the integrated cycle infrastructure, and a big part of what we talked about in terms of Granton and also at the Gall. But that area of separating pedestrians from cycle routes to increase average speed would really accelerate the move from cars to bikes. Do we agree with that? Any people challenging that view? Any comments on the impact of that change? Because as we go through change, there has been some challenges from the public around the pain of that change.
So it depends. Somewhere, yes. Some places, yes. And it very much depends what you are removing to build that design. So I'll give you a prime example. In my ward, Great Junction Street, when we were looking at Spaces for People project to expand the pedestrian environment, actually, nobody had any comment on it, because the businesses weren't used to loading facilities or certainly segregated loading facilities or parking facilities right outside their shops. So no behaviour change was required in doing that. If you look at the same measure in Morningside, the businesses initially reacted very, very strongly. Now, actually, from the latest trading figures of December last year, which was pretty much like for like on the previous year in a COVID scenario, I think that's fantastic. Actually, I think there's been a bit of a change in attitude now that people have lived with it and really kind of understood it. But it depends what you're doing. If you're looking to build cycling infrastructure to remove parking, depending on who's parking there, you get people responding to that and potentially feeling like you're taking something away. If you are taking road space away from car travel. Potentially there's a reduction of capacity, and you have what's called induced demand working in the opposite direction, which means you're basically discouraging people from using the cars, and it does work, but it takes a little bit of time. So what people see when you put that cycling infrastructure is tailbacks for a while, and then it diminishes, and people either change direction or find another mode of transport. So it very much depends on how you structure it and what you're trying to do. You cannot do this painlessly. There will be businesses who will claim that they need the parking spaces right outside their door, that 100% of their customers go there by car. This is Edinburgh. That isn't true. More than 1 in 4 journeys in total are on foot. Higher than average journeys are by bike, and that's increased hugely through COVID, and we need to cater for those people who want to get around our city like that. And if we're to build a sustainable future again, we can't rely on people taking those 250-metre journeys by car. We just cannot afford that level of space to be taken up within our communities, never mind the issues of childhood asthma and everything else that comes with the pollution of that. So very much it's not an easy thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And there's a huge, I think, public majority for that agenda right across our city.
Adam, many thanks. Sadly, we've run out of time for more questions. Lots of good questions there, so we will follow up on those. I would just go around the panel, please, and just ask you to give me your closing remarks before we wrap up by midday. So starting with you, Richard, if you'd just like to comment at the end, please.
It's been a really useful conversation. I think the things I take away from this are that there's a lot of people now, as Nick said, are really focused on the social agenda and social impact, and I think that is starting to permeate the investment market, and I think that will lead to change, and that's been tangible just within the last year. And I think COVID has made us all focus on it much more, but I think it will have a legacy which will be a positive one, hopefully, for the city. And I do have a very optimistic view on the future and the changes that Councillor McVey was just describing in relation to active travel and the use of the car.
Thank you. John Batten.
Edinburgh is one of the most livable cities in the world. Adam said it's the most beautiful city in the world, and I'll give him that on this. Certainly on this panel, it's more beautiful than New York City for sure. And so you're really starting at a really attractive advantage, and I would leverage those advantages. And you are, that livability is underpinned by your accessibility, and all the language I've heard today reinforces your commitment to connectivity, inclusion, accessibility. And you're a city that I think is very attractive for investment. And I think that you're enterprising, you're thinking of development, you're thinking of public-private partnerships. Clearly from this discussion, I think you are leveraging your advantages and building from them.
Thank you, John. Jude, Barber.
Thanks. I mean, I think what I've taken away from this is really that, it's just really important that we're all committed to this, and that actually, to see the Race to Zero as an opportunity and not always a challenge. I mean, that's how we've dealt with it within our private business. And that really, again, for me, it's just to place design, creativity and holistic thinking at the centre of everything that we do around looking for solutions and looking for opportunities. And really, finally, just say that I think, one thing we haven't talked about in huge detail is just ensuring that those that live in the places that we're designing are active agents within that, and that we see everyone genuinely involved in this process, everybody from the investors, joiners, teachers, policymakers, cultural leaders, that we're all part of that solution to getting there.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Nick.
Thanks. Yeah, I think John's hit the nail on the head. We're starting from a position of strength, but we can't become complacent. I think the infrastructure we've talked about, not just in terms of transport infrastructure, which is critical in helping us move forward, but the technological infrastructure that needs to be in place to support evolution and progress from where we are, and also our ability to facilitate change a bit quicker than we have perhaps done in the past will be really important to continue to attract investment from domestic investors, private sector, overseas investors, and for that collaboration between public and private sector.
Thank you, Nick. And Sat?
Thanks, Graham. I think for me, what's come out of the discussions today are, just the really exciting opportunities I think we've got together, both as public and private partners, to deliver ambitious projects. I think the important thing for all of us is that we go beyond just bricks and mortar and really into the communities and the regions that we're trying to develop and work within. I think ultimately, the parts I didn't touch on today are, all of the community wealth building principles that we're also trying to embed into Granton, the work that we do with partners, both around culture and learning strategies to try and improve cultural opportunity within the area, learning opportunities, attainment levels, creating jobs for the future, creating jobs for local people. That is ultimately what I think our job is here, is to develop areas and develop the city in a better way, and in a way that will provide opportunities, I think, for people for the future, and to provide opportunities for a better life. And I think that's what's come out of COVID as well, just that kind of framed view now that we have to do things better, and that we need to focus in on kind of key areas. And for me, those are net zero carbon, social inclusion, and well-being and inequality.
Excellent. Adam, if you could finish comments from the panel, please.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with comments that have been made about partnership being important and getting the right mix and the right delivery of this. There's a huge amount of opportunity for investment in development in Edinburgh, and I agree with other comments that Edinburgh is a good bet for a whole host of reasons in terms of how we go forward. I wanted to say the word I don't think I've heard today, although apologies to anyone who's said it and I missed it. Edinburgh is a fantastic centre of innovation. The frontier parts of the economy that are real growth sectors, and those where it's emerging technologies, where the world will be looking for the solutions that are born right here in Edinburgh, I think are here. I think are being developed here, and they're being developed in creative industries. They're being developed in health science. They're being developed in data science. There's a huge amount going on that frontier of new everything, really, in the capital. And I think that's hugely exciting. And it's also a huge linchpin of Edinburgh's future success. But I wanted to say, John said right at the start in his first contribution that Edinburgh should stay the course. And I completely agree with that. I think we have a clear vision of what we want Edinburgh to be. I think we have learned the lessons from previous recessions and major incidents where people have traditionally pulled back from their ambition and immediately threw out things like Fair Work and everything else, trying to get back on that hamster wheel of economic growth. Edinburgh is not adopting that plan. The cultural strategy, the tourism strategy that we had approved just before COVID is just as valid now as it was before. So is our economic strategy, so is our business plan that was in the offing throughout that process. Everything that we are trying to do, those longer term aspirations are undimmed by what we have all lived through over the last year. If anything, our resolve to deliver that for our population is even stronger. And I'd be delighted with as many people as possible to come and bring their expertise, their resources, and their ability to try and help us deliver on that vision.
Fantastic. Excellent closing remarks. And really, there's nothing left for me to say. I think you've all said it very, very well. And the opportunity to further improve quality of life in Edinburgh is very much there. So thank you very much again for the panellists. Thank you for the questions and answers. And if I may now hand over to Natasha from White Label.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you to the panel for an insightful and inspirational discussion. And thank you to the audience for joining us. We hope that you can join us for one of the other sessions taking place today as part of our Scotland is Now Race to Zero 2-day conference. The programme for today's sessions is now on your screen, and the next session will be The Strength of Scotland's Life Science Sector, which will begin shortly at midday. The link to join the next panel is now in the Zoom chat, and your links for all sessions are included in your interactive programme. Also in the programme, in the Get in Touch section, is the team email address. Please get in touch to speak with the team. We welcome inquiries from any investors, developers or stakeholders who are interested in projects mentioned over the 2 days, or if you would like more information about investing in Scotland. This email address has also been posted in the Zoom chat. We look forward to seeing you again shortly, and thank you once again.